Hello, welcome to this episode of the DHF podcast. I'm your host, Sam. I'm a DHF board member. I'm also the lead of the first ever DHF church plant. Love to tell you more about that. And I'd certainly love for you to check out the website, discipleheritage.org, if you've not heard about our ministry and all that we're doing to help churches and Christians continue to do the work that God has called them to do. But that's not our topic today. Our topic today is going to feature some friends of mine. But first, I actually want to introduce a brand new co-host. As you know, we typically do 2 DHF pastors on here as we interview others. And today I have Brandon Chappell. Brandon, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, thank you for inviting me on. Today is actually October 1st when we recorded this, but it's my year of being in full-time ministry. I am a pastor in Blue Mound, Illinois. If you don't know where that's at, don't worry. Not a lot of other people do either. It's a blink and you miss it kind of town. But God is definitely doing some things here in Blue Mound, and I'm excited to see what's in the future.
I'm so excited you joined, and I knew some folks that helped hire you, and I knew Ellen Moma, and she's a DHF board member, and she was talking really nice things about you, and then we got to meet at the conference in person, and so I'm glad that we get to connect as pastors from all across the U.S., and he isn't kidding if you don't know where Blue Mound is. I literally drove through it and was like, oh, wait, hold on. That's where Ellen lives. I was visiting another church in Illinois and was driving back to the airport. I was like, oh, wait, what? I should have said hi. Oops, my bad. But you know what? There's people there that need the gospel, and I'm so glad that you can serve Christ in that area. And then I have with me some friends I met way over in California a couple of years ago in person and have interacted with online off and on for years because they're in kind of the same little world that I'm into, the apologetics world, something that, you know, is not the main focus of our podcast, but because of my passion for it, often comes up. But I have with us Andrew and David from the Tent Making Christianity podcast. Could you guys just take turns, maybe Andrew first, telling us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Well, thanks, first of all, for having us on. We really appreciate it. You were on our podcast a few weeks ago, and that episode actually just dropped today, October 1st. So if anyone's interested in that, come on over and check us out, and you'll get to hear more goodness from Sam. So,
all right. I didn't even think to plug it today. I plugged the episode that dropped to the DHF podcast. Now I got to go plug Tent Making Christianity.
Sure. Yeah, you bet. So a little bit about myself. So I guess this is the point where I'm supposed to give my testimony, right? and David's laughing because he knows what's coming here. I am widely known for having the worst testimony in Christendom. Okay, David disagrees, but
I do disagree, but we'll get to that.
So I grew up pretty much away from religion. My parents took us to church when I was very young, but there were some issues in the church and they left shortly after that, and we never went back. Describe myself pretty much as an apathetic atheist. Really didn't think too much about religion, didn't care a lot about it. But if you did ask me, I would probably still identify as Lutheran. And matter of fact, when I met my wife, she asked what religion I was, and I just sort of blurted out Lutheran because that was the only kind of tradition I had known. And, we got married and had kids and my wife wanted to go to church. And I really didn't have a problem with that. You know, I thought, okay, this will be a good thing for the kids. Maybe they won't get in trouble growing up and, we'll instill some good morals in them. But at that time, I still wasn't a believer. Our church decided to do an outreach program called, Alpha. Alpha, thank you. Yeah. An Alpha program run by an English pastor named Nicky Gumbel. And part of this process is you kind of invite your friends to come in and listen to the presentations. It was a 6-week course. I think they've shortened it down a little bit since then. But I got asked to lead one of the small groups. So if you think God doesn't have a sense of humor, right? Here I am, someone who's not a believer, and I get put in charge of bringing this small group of people to Christ, right? So it was actually through that program, though, Alpha, that I wound up doing some research on, really it was the historical Jesus that kind of won me over to the truth of Christianity. wound up becoming a Christian. And again, part of that program was an apologetic. It had an apologetic bent to it. Some of the required reading was from Lee Strobel, so began to develop a passion for Christian apologetics. Eventually wound up going to Biola and getting a certificate in Christian apologetics from them, and took that passion into serving my local church as a youth leader. And it's at this point that David kind of comes into the story. He was a member of my youth group and really was heavily involved in what we were doing, really passionate about apologetics too. So we hit it off fairly quickly. And when I started Tent Making Christianity, I knew I wanted him to be a part of it. And so at this point, I will quit hogging the airtime and hand it over to David.
Sure. Yeah. So, yeah, you mentioned that we met. So you talk about not having a testimony, Drew, and I always give you a little bit of a hard time for that because I really like your testimony. Speaking as someone who actually does not have a testimony, because I don't remember ever not being a Christian. If someone asks me for like a specific salvation experience, I don't really have like a singular moment I can point to. It's kind of just always been there, but it's definitely changed shapes and forms over the years. And I'd say probably the biggest thing was around like 12, 13. So I'd grown up going to this same fairly small Lutheran church. I'd been going through their confirmation program, so kind of learning more of the ins and outs of how to take my faith a bit more seriously. What does all this actually mean? But the big thing was, at this point also, my older brother was graduating high school. And for his high school graduation, he got a copy of Tactics by Greg Koukl. And me being the wide-eyed younger brother who wants to be into everything he's into and do everything he's doing, decided to start reading it too. And at 13, kind of just got hooked. And for some reason, it resonated with me at the time. And that snowball has kind of just kept rolling for years and years ever since. So I kind of kept reading some books, doing just what little I could find on my own. Drew then coming to town and becoming the youth pastor at the church was a very big catalyst for that, because suddenly, like, everything I ever wanted out of a youth group is suddenly coming to fruition now. Suddenly we're going to things like the Rethink or Reality Apologetics conferences. We're going through like the Tactics video program, reading Cold Case Christianity by J. Warner Wallace, things like that. Just kept on going from there. And we get to Tent Making Christianity, and I just, Drew is starting something. This is cool. Even though we're not going to the same church, we're not even living in the same city anymore. This has just been a great opportunity to kind of use this passion that we both had, but I don't think it's always been entirely clear on the best outlet for this passion for apologetics and theology. Like, I think we've both also found other ways through like local church ministries and whatnot, but this is kind of a great opportunity to take that passion, that drive, and try to channel it towards something valuable when neither of us have really felt the specific call to pastoral ministry.
Wow, you guys both downplayed your testimonies, and I thought they were wonderful. I mean, Andrew, that is crazy. I think Brandon might not have been to that DHF conference, but my first one, I met two pastors who were converted to being Christians while they were behind the pulpit. They were preaching, and they're both like, wait, I really believe this. This really happened, which just shows you the state of churches today. Mm-hmm. But Andrew, that is amazing that you were in that spot and then got to dig in like that. And David, that's the testimony we want for our kids, right?
Sure.
They've always known Jesus, and at some point they're like, I'm following this guy. I'm going to do something about this, not just my parents' faith or, it's there, but you've been active. So I think those are great testimonies.
I guess my question would be, with you guys being in apologetics and David, with you having grown up in the church, and even to Andrew, how did you incorporate that into youth? Like, I mean, in my philosophy, that we just started up our own student ministries here, and our philosophy is that because I coach Little League baseball. We teach fundamental baseball at such a young age, and we teach them, hey, this is how you field a ball. This is how you throw a ball. This is how you hit a ball. And we can take that same philosophy and use it to theological things. But when it comes to apologetics, a lot of people might think that's a little bit more like academia when it comes to theology. How do you incorporate that into your youth program?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. And you're right. You do get some initial pushback of, oh, this is that egghead stuff, right? I can't remember who it was, but someone says that apologetics is kind of like the Star Trek convention of Christianity, right? Where you're kind of the goofballs off in the corner, all right, David's representing there. Yeah.
I was going to say, wait, did they said that? That's a compliment, right?
Like I thought so. Sure.
I'd take that as a compliment.
Yeah.
We're with like-minded people, Drew.
Yeah.
We finally found them.
Yeah.
We're just all over the place. That's it.
Yep. And I did take over from a fairly successful previous youth minister there. He had a really good thing going. He was really well liked. And so this was a big change. Not that I'm saying my way was better or his way was worse. It was just different, right? Mm-hmm. And I really wanted that education piece to be part of this, because really, you think about it, we're fighting against the culture, and we have 1 hour a week, if we're lucky, to try to make a difference in kids' lives. And most of the time, I started teaching junior high and high school kids. So these are kids who are just starting to come into their own, and we really want to try to make their faith and not just inherit it from their parents. Right. So I think the first thing is that kids at that age tend to widely overestimate their ability to defend their faith, and also widely overestimate how many challenges they're going to face when they start getting into high school, college. So the first thing that was important to me is kind of create the need, right? Mm-hmm. Make the kids understand, why do I need this and why is it important? So I just happened to kind of catch lightning in a bottle. J. Warner Wallace, if you're familiar with him, the author of Cold Case Christianity and several other books, he was filling in on the Stand to Reason podcast, and got to know him a little bit and invited him out to do a atheist role play with my students. And it was right before Cold Case Christianity came out. And he came out, and actually, looking back on, I think my group was actually one of the better groups that have gone through an atheist role play, in no large part just to David there, did pretty well. But I think that was kind of the first step, was just showing them how little they actually knew about their faith, and creating that hunger to, hey, I don't want to not know what I believe or not be able to defend it. And that was kind of the impetus to get things started.
Okay. Now you said you had, you kind of stepped into the role after a minister who had a successful youth ministry. And then you kind of implemented a little bit of change. Now, when change comes in, regardless if it's good or bad, there's going to be differing opinions. Yes. Now, what was the outcome of that? Like, how did the kids respond to it initially?
So you're right. Initially, it was, hey, where's the pizza? Where's the games? Why has this changed so much? This is kind of, you're making us work a little bit now, and we're not really down with that. And I'm not going to lie, we did lose some kids, right? Some who weren't that invested, who didn't want to put the work in. Yeah, they did fall away. The thing that was encouraging to me, though, was later on, we started to build back up from kids inviting their friends in to say, hey, look what we're doing here. This is kind of special. And really, a lot of our youth groups, we would start off with a topic. I'd kind of go through maybe 15, 20 minutes, and then the next 40 was just discussion back and forth, and really allowing them to ask questions and flesh these answers out for themselves. Turned into a really positive experience. And while we did lose some at the beginning, we started building back up. And the thing, it was kind of odd. I got a little bit of criticism for, but it was a lot of kids who weren't members of the church, which I thought was a great thing. And I think the criticism might have been, well, can you get their parents to come too? And I'm working on it, but, I thought it was great that we were starting to actually have kids bring their friends who weren't Christians in, who weren't normally involved in that environment, and exposing them to it. So,
oh man,
David, were you there from the beginning?
Yeah, so this was the church that I grew up in, and so I was even around for the previous youth leader, and was kind of excited to see just any kind of youth program take off, because that was something that the church has always struggled with. Right. And so, to see something really take off with the previous youth leader was exciting. Then, like, the tragedy of him leaving, it's like, okay, what's next? Is this just going to be another crash and burn? And then to see Drew step up, and like he said, it was definitely a change. Like, there were some aspects of kind of how we had done it before that were incorporated in. So you kind of, some compromises made in that sense of like, how did we do it before? What did people like? What can we incorporate? But not to the point of watering down the content or discussions. I think that was Drew's big deal breaker. There's one thing we are not going to do. It's keep the content light and easy and simple. Like, he's going to kind of push us in that direction. And yeah, it didn't work for everyone. Not everyone was happy about that, but it did kind of solidify into a core over time, I would say. And that core, I think, got quite a bit out of it. I mean, I certainly did.
Wow, I have so many thoughts, Andrew and David. I got to go to the CIA training with J. Warner Wallace and do some of those kinds of things. And so, for those that are not familiar, an atheist role play is someone is coming in and pretending to be an atheist. They're not a real atheist, but they're like, all right, class, today we're going to have an atheist come and join us in church and tell us why he's an atheist, which sounds crazy. Parents are going to get nervous about it. You can clue them in, but then they're going to go through and be like, here's why I'm not an atheist. There's contradictions in the Bible. And even if your students ask, well, show us one. They'll tell you and a parent what might look like a contradiction. Well, science says this, that, and the other. And then you go, all right, students, how do you feel about your, faith? And they go, we got real questions. Well, then the role player will go, well, good news, I'm actually a Christian. And there's an answer to every single challenge that I've just given you. And so if you're feeling shaken right now, we want to help you not feel shaken in the real world when you encounter a real atheist. And it's a wonderful thing. I've never gotten to pull one off, which is unfortunate. I wanted to do it when I was with Ratio Christi. It just didn't happen. But when we think about youth group, what's the metric for a healthy youth group? Is it a lot of kids? Because feeding them will get a lot of kids in. And I think there's room for games and fellowship. And I think it's an important part of the pieces. And then right now, even in the church plant stage, we've got some kids already, and we're walking them through the basic, what are the basics of the faith with Discipleship Gospel Workbook. And so we're taking them through Mark. But then there's also, they've got real questions that they're answering. And the truth of the matter is, stats show they're probably realistically already gone and they're in high school. And then it shows up when they hit the college campus, and up to 80% of them walk away from church attendance and the faith. And so I think a healthy youth group that's going to be doing what you did, Andrew, in that you're prepping them for when they're outside the doors. And that might not appeal to everybody as much, but in long term, my metric when I hired a youth pastor was always, it's going to be really hard to tell if you're a good youth pastor until 5 or 10 years from now, and I see your youth group and what their walk with Christ is. That's how I'm going to know.
Yeah.
So I encourage everybody to adjust their metrics a little bit. It may not be the biggest youth group in town, but it could still be, really impactful long term. But that's amazing.
And like you said, you don't have to, I kind of made light of the games and pizza, and we still did that too, in effect. Although it was kind of funny, David was my only student. He would skip the bowling nights and be there for the apologetics nights, and like everybody, the opposite of everyone else, right? But so yeah, you have fun, you make things age appropriate, but you still keep the content at a high level, and really, kids are a lot more capable of grasping stuff than we think they are. I would always try to teach things a grade level above where they were. If they were in junior high, I'd teach at a high school level. If they were in high school, I'd teach at a college level. It pushes them, it challenges them, but I think they appreciate the fact that you're giving them credit for being able to understand this and treating them like they're more mature, and that comes across, I think, in their learning.
And if you can take them to They're now called reality conferences. They were Rethink when we guys met,
right?
Which went out in California, or a Maven conference. There's a few of those too, and that's by the original Brett Koukl. He started the reality or Rethink conferences. Seeing thousands of kids sometimes all excited to learn the reasons behind their faith that they can trust it and then go live it, like that's really impactful.
That's probably the biggest kind of shocker in this whole thing for a lot of people, is we kind of assume young people aren't really interested in these things. Even kind of to what you were saying, Sam, about like the college area. So I've spent more time in the last few years working in college ministry just because that was where I was at. So I was involved in things like Cru, Campus Crusade for Christ. And I kind of went in expecting kind of just a glorified casual social youth group, and was surprised to find there are people here who are really hungry for diving deeper into the word. They're wanting to go deeper, but there wasn't any kind of the more kind of academic apologetics bent to it. It was more, let's have more and more Bible studies. And so that was kind of an opportunity for me to come in and say, let's have more of these conversations. And they ended up really taking off for a few years there, just because this is something that at this point in time, these are all adults. They kind of know what they don't know, at least a little bit. And so to just kind of have this opportunity handed to them, people were excited. It was something fresh, but also something you could tell everyone's like, okay, we finally get to talk about these things.
You get the person excited. You mean I can ask you like, hey, this verse and this verse looks weird and I don't understand them together, and you're not just going to tell me to have more faith. You're actually going to like walk me through it.
We can do that?
Yeah, we can actually ask that question, because people are asking that question anyways.
Right.
So how do you approach that just in a group? Like what sparks that conversation and how do you how do you see that in somebody else, that they're wanting that more deep dive apologetic approach to their faith?
Yeah, I think, David kind of hit it on the head. You're going to get a lot of questions, right? And that's a good thing. And we have a sad history in the church of not wanting to answer questions, or not wanting to promote questions, or making it seem like if you ask a question, your faith is slipping, and now we're worried about you and we need to pray for you. And people have questions. I have been studying apologetics for 15 years now. I still have questions. I don't know everything, and every now and then I come up against a challenge I haven't seen before, and I have to research it a little bit and find the answer. But I think that's kind of a good key, is someone who asks a lot of questions. And I would just encourage people, if they're asking questions, don't shut them down. Even if you don't know, I don't know the answer is a perfectly acceptable answer to them. I don't know that, but let's try to find out together. Learn, let me take a look, see what I can find. But don't just say, we don't do questions here, or, you have a lack of faith. But, David, you kind of been on the forefront of this for a while now in the college area. What do you think about this question?
So at least among a Christian community, like these are people who would identify as Christian in the college scene. So I'm not talking about more like a Ratio Christi thing where we're going out to find people. But among the Christians in college, I feel like for me, it was a fairly gradual discovery. Like for me, it wasn't I show up first day, hey guys, I want to teach you all apologetics. It was more, I'm new here, getting incorporated, going to Bible studies, getting to know people, just building relationships. And the more I did that, the more they kind of knew me as the apologetics guy a little bit. Like I would regularly bring up questions of that sort if I was in a Bible study with these people, and eventually was able to get a better sense of like, people are open to this. They haven't had a lot of it. They might not be wanting to start something themselves, but basically, if you want to do something, David, go for it. We'll support you all the way. And so that kind of openness led to more conversations, which leads to more of that interest and excitement building, I would say.
Do you think that there's a lot of interest on the college campuses? Because a lot of the videos that you see, or a lot of the things that you see in social media, or even just the media in general, there isn't, it doesn't seem like, let alone religion, but Christianity is on the forefront of anybody's minds in a college scene.
I think you're definitely onto something there, and that was kind of one of the biggest surprises for me. So I went to a pretty massive state school here in California, so kind of knew what I was getting myself into, or at least I thought it. I thought it was going to be largely, your kind of masses of angry atheistic professors, right? And the funny thing is, I only actually met one person I would say describe as that kind of aggressive atheist, and we became really good friends for a while there because we would just spend hours and hours talking about every topic on the field. But what I saw way more than that was just simply apathy. Just, it's not that I think Christianity is true or false. It's just I don't care. Or if I do care, it's in more of a pragmatic, it's harmful sort of way. So you're kind of dealing with that question more so. You kind of need to stress why the truth matters in the first place to these people, because often that's not really the questions they're asking. Whether that is in a Christian context or in a non-Christian context in a college scene, the questions being asked are a little bit different than they were 10, 20 years ago. But I think by stressing the truth of these things, we can kind of also speak to those bigger questions of morality and apathy. Like by showing the stakes here of it, whether this is true and how that matters, I think that can then lead into, but is it good? Is it important? And things like that.
I know when I was on the college campus, and even today, very often I'll see somebody, on the other side of the aisle, whether it be theologically, politically, whatever, upset about a rights issue. And so I could begin the conversation. You know what? Maybe they're not going to hear me right now about Jesus himself and the gospel. But if I can begin a question, well, where do rights come from? What is a right? Then we start heading towards a moral argument for the existence of God. And then from there, and it might take multiple conversations, but it's one of those leading in to the conversation kind of things. They are, some of them are hearing on the college campus for the first time. There's no such thing as truth. They're starting to hear it younger now. But having that conversation, is that really true, gets them thinking, and then you can slowly steer them in that right direction.
Even just being the one person who will actually push back on some of those things. Maybe they have had this idea drilled into them for 5 years now, but seeing someone who is not clearly like either super angry or not well informed, just someone who's fairly calm and seems reasonable, able to push back on those things, that can make a difference.
But we should wrap it up. I wanted to thank you, Brandon. You're definitely coming back as a co-host. I really appreciate you popping in with some questions. And then Andrew and David, I want you to plug where folks can find out more and just follow along with your work at the Tent Making Christianity podcast.
Sure. So we are normally at tentmakingchristianity.com. We are currently upgrading our website a little bit. So maybe another week or two before that's back online. And I'm discovering there may be a lot of work here re-uploading some of our content and stuff. But the Tent Making Christianity podcast, we're on all the major podcasting sites, the Apple, Google, we're on
Spotify.
All of them. So Spotify, yep, thank you, David. David's good. He's the young guy, so he keeps me up on all the techie stuff. So
more like I use Spotify, so I needed to make sure we were on Spotify.
Awesome. Well, your social media handle on Facebook is?
We are Tent Making Christianity on Facebook. So
that's the one I was looking for. And you guys have a Facebook group as well.
We do, yes.
So I can put those, or I can have our friend Fred put those in the show notes. And that way you can just click, whether you're listening to the DHF podcast on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, any of those things, you can just click in the show notes. This has been this particular episode of the Disciple Heritage Fellowship podcast, or the DHF podcast. You can find out more about our ministry at discipleheritage.org. If you enjoyed this, we'd love it if you would like, comment if you're on YouTube, and of course, share with your friends, and we'll catch you on the next one.